guys, welcome back. So, long time no see. I suck at this. I think we've kind of like come to terms with that fact. But I'm really excited to film today's video because I love true crime. Always have. I think that's kind of like a pretty big trend right now. It's definitely becoming more like trendy to talk about true crime and all that. And I think it's awesome because I've been obsessed with it since I was like 10, which is very unhealthy, but you know, it is what it is. But I wanted to kind of throw some true crime into my channel, and I thought a really good way to do that would be to basically sit down, put on a full face of makeup, and tell you guys about a true crime story that has interested me lately, that I've, you know, really been invested in. I don't want this to come across in like an offensive way to like the families and the victims, because I know these are stories of real people that have been brutally murdered or were, you know, taken or whatever, and I don't want it to come across in like an offensive way. I just want it to be like I'm sitting down with my girlfriends, getting ready for a night out, and I just happen to like delve into a story about murder, because, you know, my generation are a bunch of wackadoodles apparently. But if you guys have any like thoughts on this series, if you have any, you know, tips for me on better ways to talk about it so it doesn't seem as offensive as I feel like it might, because I get really hyped up on these things, leave them down below. But also let me know if you're excited about this, if you're also obsessed with true crime, and let's just go ahead and dive right in, shall we? So today I am, by the way, all the products I'll be using are going to be listed down below in the description box because I don't want to like interrupt the story to talk about makeup. But today I'm going to talk about the story of Dr. No. He was a serial killer out of Ohio, and he mainly killed prostitutes from truck stops. All of his victims were found partially naked with all of their jewelry and belongings removed. They were all beaten and or strangled. That was kind of his MO, was, you know, beating them basically to unrecognizable states in their faces, or strangulating them, strangling them, or suffocating them. And you might be wondering why that name sounds so familiar. It's actually because somebody has recently been connected to a few of the cases just in early February, I believe, which I will talk about later in the video. So if you're interested, just kind of keep around to hear about the surprising conclusion. But I want to start from the beginning and basically tell the case as we knew it up until January, basically. So Dr. No was a serial killer who frequented prostitutes out of truck stops in Ohio. And at this time, prostitutes were using CB radios to connect with truck driver Johns. And one of them happened to be Dr. No, who at this time in Ohio, girls kind of started remembering him. He kind of had a reputation for roughing girls up, for scaring them, for just being all around creepy, as truck drivers kind of seem to always be. And he basically just had a reputation about him. So a lot of the girls kind of knew not to go with him, not to mess with him or anything. Dr. No was actually his CB handle name. He also tended to go by Stargazer and Dragon, but Dr. No was just kind of like what the media sensationalized as like his name, so that's kind of what everyone knows him as. But he did have other names he went by, and there were actually a few guys that went by Dr. No, but I'll talk about that later. So the first victim, possibly the first victim, was found in April of 1981. She was actually a Jane Doe up until 2018, at which point the DNA Doe Project actually ran her DNA and found out her identity. But up until then, she was actually known as the Buckskin Girl because she was found in nothing but a deerskin poncho, which I find is like really weird, but it's also Ohio, so like can't be that weird, I guess. But yeah, she was known as the Buckskin Girl for a really long time until 2018 when they finally found her identity, which came out to be Marsha King. She was in her 20s, like early 20s, and she was actually hitchhiking from Arkansas when her family last saw her. So police aren't totally convinced that she was one of Dr. No's victims, but she was found in the right area, and I think more the media has kind of connected her to it than anything else. But one thing to note about all of his victims, they were all found off of the main stretch of I-70 in Ohio. So I'll put a map up here of like the little dots of where all the victims were found, but there's like I-70 that goes across the state, and then there's like I-75, I-71, and like a few other like offshoots, but they all come off of I-71. And so he's kind of known as like the I-71 killer because like that's where all the victims were kind of like found in the general region, but they were all kind of found off of like I-75 or I-71 or something like that. But like those are all offshoots, so I guess it counts. But the second victim was found in June of 1985, so definitely a big jump there. But this victim was Marsha Matthews. She was 25 years old, and she was found in Richland, Ohio. The Buckskin Girl, I forgot to mention, was actually found in Troy, Ohio. So counties, by the way. Troy County, Richland County. So they were actually all found in different counties, which kind of meant that the case didn't get connected, or the cases didn't get connected for a very long time. But Marsha Matthews was again found in Richland, Ohio, partially clothed and beaten and strangled, just like all the other victims, unfortunately. The third victim was in July of 1986. She was Shirley Taylor. Sorry if I'm looking down, I have like my notes right here. She was Shirley Taylor. She was 23 years old, and she was found in Medina County. I'm just going to run through the victims super kind of quickly without dwelling on details too much, because there's actually a lot of information in this case. So I will leave articles down below in case you're interested in like more in depth of like how they were found, specifics on how they were killed and stuff like that. I'll leave all that down below. Let me know if you would prefer if I like went into that more. But for this case, I'm just gonna leave it all in the description box with some articles and whatnot. Okay, so I had to speed this along a little bit, so I skipped forward a few steps. But let's move on to 1986, December specifically, when April Barnett was found. She was 18 years old, and she was found in Ashland County. And something interesting about her is she was actually known to work the same truck stop that Marsha Matthews was known to work at. So they kind of had that small connection in life as well as in death, which people kind of hung on to. People kind of thought that like that was something like super important about the case. I think honestly that truck stop, it was like Union 76, I think was what it was called. I think it was like the biggest truck stop in Ohio on that interstate, so I don't think it's that big of a like clue, but I do think that that's pretty interesting that like they did work at the same truck stop, and they were kind of like known to kind of like know each other in that way. But again, just like all the others, she was found partially naked, beaten, strangled, all that jazz, which sucks. She was only 18, like she was just a little baby, and she just got caught up in it, and I hate that. That's like the worst, when it's just like a little baby that doesn't know any better. Anyways, the next victim is actually found in March of 1987, so, you know, took a couple months off there. She was Anne Marie Patterson, and she was 27 years old. And this case is actually the case that, I don't know, I kind of consider her like the anchor case of this case, because, or the anchor victim of this case, because she is pretty much the number one person that people talk about and bring up when talking about this case, because she is the only victim that kind of, in a weird way, has a witness to the night that she disappeared. Her husband was actually her pimp, which I find super weird. Like, why is your husband your pimp? That's odd. And she was actually 4 months pregnant when she disappeared. The day before she disappeared, which was December 7th, no, not December 7th, February, why do I keep doing that? February 7th was the day that she disappeared, that she was like last seen. So February 6th, she had actually been arrested for prostitution, and her husband thinks that she got into an altercation with Dr. No that night, and that was why she got arrested. But he never really knew for sure. But that night when she was arrested, she actually told police officers that she knew somebody was targeting them, was basically hunting prostitutes out of Ohio truck stops, and she thought she knew who the perpetrator was, and that she feared for her life, and they basically ignored her. They did nothing about it. They took no information from her. They just were like, okay, yeah, you're crazy, whatever, locked her up, let her out the next day, and she went back to prostituting. And so that night, her husband takes her to, again, the Union 76 truck stop, the same truck stop that Marsha Matthews and April Barnett worked out of. And she'd actually vowed to a couple of the girls there that she was going to find out who was doing this to them. She was going to find out who was hurting these girls, and she was going to help make it stop. So her husband drops her off at Union 76 station, or truck stop, whatever you want to call it, and she's sitting in his truck using his CB radio to find her first John of the night. Her CB name was Sleeping Beauty, and while she's sitting in his truck, Dr. No comes over the radio and calls for Sleeping Beauty specifically, and asks, is basically, soliciting her, and she straight up says, nope, not gonna happen. I know who you are, I know what you do, I know your reputation, and I'm not gonna come with you. And they kind of go back and forth a little bit, and she eventually just like, no, absolutely not. So her husband thought that was kind of weird that, like, she was straight up turning down him because, like, she knew that all the girls were afraid of him, but he didn't really say anything. And then she goes off on her night, and I guess finds her first John, gets out of the truck, and, keeps going with her night. He drives away. By December 8th, she is missing, but he doesn't actually report her missing until December again. February 8th, she's, like, fully missing. He doesn't report her missing until February 14th, which I find really weird. Like, your wife is a prostitute who's known to get into trouble with men. She's 4 months pregnant with your child, and you don't see her for a week, and you say nothing? Like, okay, that's super sketch, guy, but alright. So he reports her missing finally on February 14th, and they're kind of like, okay, well, she's a prostitute, we don't really care. That's kind of how it was. It was the 80s in Ohio. Prostitutes were not the big deal. Nobody really cared. But she was actually found, some reports said that she was found 25 days later. Some reports said she was found 40 to 43 days later. I'm going with 40 because that's, like, the number that was most consistently used. So I'm saying 40. She was found about a little over a month later. But was super odd and a little creepy about her case was the fact that they could tell that she died anywhere from 24 to 48 hours after she went missing. So by the 10th, basically, she was dead. However, they could also tell that she had only been in the position that they found her in, off of, over the guardrail, off of Interstate 70 for less than 48 hours. So that means he kept her dead body for about a month. And they said that they also thought that she had been refrigerated. she had been refrigerated. I saw some commenters on a Reddit post that were like, okay, super creepy, but also, this is February in Ohio. What's the difference between being refrigerated and just being out in the cold? Which I would love to know, like, how do they know it was refrigeration and not just that she was, like, out in the cold elements for a month? I'm sure they have, like, looked into that and, like, said, no, it was definitely refrigeration, but, like, I don't know, it seems odd, right? So, yeah, she was kept probably in refrigeration for about a month before she was dumped, which led police to think that this guy was they already kind of thought that he was a long-haul truck driver, but they started to suspect that he probably had a truck that had refrigeration capabilities on it if, you know, he was driving for, or driving cold foods around. Then that kind of made sense. So they were kind of looking for that. And there were also some witnesses that said that Anne Marie had last been seen getting into a dark blue or black Peterbilt truck. So they were kind of holding on to that idea and looking for that and talking to some truck companies, and nothing really ever panned out. They tried to find Dr. No a lot with this information, and they actually found 5 different guys that used the name Dr. No, but nothing ever really panned out. And what's funny is, at this point, the cops straight up said they didn't think Dr. No killed her. They just really wanted to talk to him. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't think Dr. No killed her? Like, who else would have killed her? I don't know. I just think it's a little like, really? Really? You don't think Dr. No killed her? Because I think Dr. No killed her. Sorry, got a little sassy there. But she was actually found 250 miles away from the truck stop in Warren County, Ohio. Like I said, all of the victims were found in different counties. None of them were doubled up, which made a lot of people think that maybe this guy had some sort of knowledge about law and the police officers, and that there wasn't really a lot of communication between counties, because none of these cases were connected until much, much later, which I will talk about in a minute. But super sad. The next victim was found in August of 1987, and she was actually a Jane Doe for 22 years until her sister finally found out about a website called Namus, which lets you put in kind of like characteristics of your missing person and see if there's any Jane or John Does out in the country that match these characteristics, and you can kind of like narrow it down by, you know, characteristics and whatnot. And she had been tipped off by a family friend about this website, Namus, and she finally looked into it and put in her sister's characteristics, and the main characteristics that actually helped find her were the fact that she had 2 small tattoos, one of a unicorn and one of a rose on each, like the top of her breast. So she put that information in there and she popped up, and it was 22 years after 1987 that her sister finally got closure and found out that this Jane Doe was Paula Beverly Davis, who went missing when she was 21 years old out of Kansas City, Missouri. And what's interesting about her case is there's been some debate of whether or not she was actually a victim of Dr. No, who was a long-haul truck driver who dumped all of his bodies in Ohio, or if she was the victim of another serial killer who was active at this time in Kansas City, Missouri, who had the same MO as Dr. No. He picked up prostitutes, would either beat them to death or strangle them, would leave them half naked on the highway, and it was very similar to Dr. No. But people wonder, okay, was she the victim of this other guy whose name was Lorenzo Gilliard, or if she was a victim of Dr. No. And she's actually officially listed as the victim of Lorenzo Gilliard on his Wikipedia page, though he was never sent to trial for her murder. But she is officially listed as one of his victims. But a lot of people do believe that she was Dr. No's victim because she was dumped in Ohio, and wasn't really Lorenzo Gilliard's thing. He, would dump them in Missouri. But I did think it was important to mention that she, again, might not be Dr. No's victim. She very well could have been a victim of Lorenzo Gilliard. And then in April of 1990, they find another Jane Doe. She was actually known as Hebron Jane Doe because she was found in Hebron County, or Hebron, Ohio, whose county was Mahoning County. Wow, I'm like jumbling up words right now. But basically she was found in Mahone County. And she was eventually identified as Patricia Corley. She was actually, her sister-in-law had tried to report her missing because she went missing from Kentucky, and she left behind her young son and her whole family, and people were worried about her. And her sister-in-law tried to report her missing, and the police told her, "You can't do that, you're not a blood relative." And she was like, what? What do you mean? And then 20 years later, she tried again, and they finally were like, okay, yeah, we'll take your missing person case, that's really fine. And as soon as they did that, they found this Jane Doe in Ohio and realized it was Patricia all along. She could have been, buried in Kentucky with her family, and her family could have had closure 20 years ago if they had just taken her case, but they refused to because it was her sister-in-law trying to report it. That just fires me up a little bit. I really hate stupidity like that. But thankfully she was eventually identified as Patricia Corley, and they were able to bring her home and lay her to rest where she should have been laid to rest all along. And then in April 1992, the last confirmed victim was found, and this was Sharron Lynn Kidzierski. I'm an idiot. She was found in Mahoning County. Patricia Corley was found in Legg County. Sorry, guys. But Sharron Lynn Kidzierski is one of those cases that, ever since I heard about this entire case, I have always latched on to Sharron Lynn because I find it so bizarre, and there's so much missing information that just I don't understand. So her family said that she went missing from Florida in 1989. She wasn't found dead until 1992 in Ohio. Where did she go? What happened? She had 2 young daughters. She did not just up and leave. The last person that saw her alive was her neighbor when she went over to ask him a question. They just stood at their doorstep for a minute, and then she left, and that was the last time she was ever seen alive. 3 years this woman was missing, and nobody knew where she was, and then she turns up in Ohio dead? Are you kidding me? I'm just where was she? This is one of those cases that really does just mind boggle me. I don't understand. And what's actually interesting is someone was actually arrested and sent to jail for the murder of Sharron. About a year after she disappeared, a man was indicted and sent to prison for her murder, and he actually died in prison. I don't feel bad for him because he was other convicted murderer. He had other raps for murder, so I don't really feel bad for him. But at the same time, it's how did they indict a guy? I couldn't find any information on this case, so I don't know. I need to dig deeper. I need to find out who this guy was, how they decided that he killed her. I'm very, very curious. But yeah, I figured I would throw that in there, that she did have, faux justice for a long time there. But I also wanted to mention that There are some other victims that are named in this case that aren't, we're not totally sure that they were victims of Dr. No, but they are named a lot in this case, so I figured I would just really quickly rattle them off. There was a woman in Illinois that was found in 1986. Her name was Jen Allen. She was 26 years old, and again, she was found in Illinois. She fit the profile, she fit the MO, but she was found in Illinois, so people were like, yeah, maybe. There was a woman in 1986. Her name was LaMonica Cole. She was 19 years old, and she was found in Philadelphia. Again, the MO, the description, everything fit. And then there was a woman in 1988 called Terry Roark, and she was found in New York. There was also a woman that I found in one article that mentioned Catherine Hill as being a victim. I could not find any information on Catherine Hill being a victim of any killer. Like, her death was like nowhere. I don't know where this article got this information from, but I figured I would go ahead and mention it just, you know, to be safe. But like, I googled for like a good like half hour trying to figure out who this woman was, where she came from, what she was about, like who, like when she was found or anything, and I literally could not find anything about her. So I don't know what that's about, but I figured I would go ahead and mention it just to be safe, because you never know. Okay, so those are the victims, basically. It's kind of like the main facts, what we kind of know. So at this point, nobody, like I said, nobody was connecting these cases. Nobody knew that they had a serial killer on their hands, because all these counties just thought they had one dead prostitute. They weren't really sure what happened, and they moved on. It wasn't until 1991 when an investigative reporter named Michael Behrens started putting the pieces together and realized that Ohio had a much bigger problem on their hands. So he actually came across the articles of the first two victims, Marcia Matthews and Shirley Taylor, and realized they seemed very familiar and very similar. So he started looking in deeper, found more of the cases, and realized this is a serial killer. So he wrote up an entire investigative report and had it published in his newspaper. 6 months later, the Attorney General for Ohio put together a special task force to find this killer, basically. They all were like, how the hell did we miss this? We fumbled this so hard. We have to catch this guy. So they put together the task force, and they're working, and basically nothing comes from it, honestly. They, know all the information they know. They get together, they talk, they get, smaller pieces of information. Like, they found that from analyzing the grass spots where the girls were found, they could tell that they had been kind of like dropped from a short height, almost as if they had been pushed out of the cab of a truck. They found that he tended to kind of toss their belongings out along the road from where they were found. That's one of those like small pieces of information that most articles didn't really talk about, but most of the girls were, a couple miles up the road, they would find like a shoe. A couple miles more, they would find like a sock. And it would all kind of come together, It was kind of like a weird trail that he left of like their belongings. But like I said, he kept most of them because, that's what serial killers do. They like their trophies. So they put all this information together, and they still didn't really have anything. Most of the girls had usable DNA on them, whether that was semen or saliva or bite marks. They had some sort of usable DNA on them, so they basically just had to sit and wait until technology caught up with it, honestly. So that leads us to today, 2019. They finally test the DNA, and they actually used a process that I find so interesting and just amazing. There's a lot of pros and cons on it, and it's one of those things you kind of have to like look up yourself and form your own opinion and whatnot. But I find it incredible. They used familial DNA. They ran the DNA through their database of other criminals, and they basically found people that had similar but not the exact same DNA markings. So basically when they're trying to match DNA, they look for 20 specific markings in DNA, and if they have all 20, then it's the same person. Well, with this familial DNA, they actually look for someone that has at least 10 of the same markings, because that means it's either going to be a parent, a sibling, or, you know, someone in that kind of like immediate family that they can then track down. And that's how they caught this guy. This man is Samuel Legg III. He was caught through familial DNA. They found him in Arizona, in a small town outside of Phoenix, and they extradited him back to Ohio to officially face charges on a 1997 rape of a 17-year-old girl. However, they also are building the case against him for 4 of the Dr. No victims. They haven't released all of these names yet. All they've said is it's 4 girls, 4 murders in the Ohio and Illinois area, which leads me to believe that the Illinois girl, Jill Allen, is actually one of his victims. But they also said that it is, they actually came out and said that Sharron Lynn is one of his victims. They found his DNA on her. It is guaranteed he killed her. So there's justice for Sharron Lynn coming. There's justice from, I'm assuming, Jill Allen coming, and 2 other girls. They are, I'm sure, still looking to find a way to link him to the rest of the murders, because we have at least 8 victims here. But as of right now, they're just focusing on these 4 girls that they have DNA matches with on him. And also, another little tidbit about this little psychopath that is Samuel Legg III. He was actually a suspect in the 1990 murder of his 14-year-old stepdaughter. Her body was found wrapped in a bag in a field, mummified, when she was 14 years old. They were very, very suspicious of him. They were trying to pin it on him. He took a polygraph and I think failed it miserably, but they didn't have enough evidence, so they let him go. And he moved on. This guy is known to have lived in a wide variety of places across the U.S. He was a long-haul truck driver, and that honestly just makes me think he probably has victims across the entire country. If he killed Sharron Lynn, he probably picked her up in Florida. That means he could have been in California. He lived in Arizona for a while. You think after 1992, he just up and was like, no, I'm done killing, thanks, I'm done. Like, no, it doesn't work like that. He moved all over the country, and he probably left a trail of bodies everywhere he went. But unfortunately, we will probably never know how many people he truly killed, how many lives he destroyed, how many families he broke up. Like, these women had children. They had husbands, they had mothers, they had sisters. The mother of Paula Beverly Davis actually had a nervous breakdown after she disappeared and ended up dying and never knew what happened to her daughter. It wasn't until her sister kept pushing that they finally found her and were able to bring her home. Like, this guy could have left a trail of bodies across the entire country. That is mind-boggling to me, and I cannot get over that fact, and I truly, truly hope that they find a way to get more information out of him, that they pin so many more murders on him. I hope Ohio has the death penalty. Just gonna say it. Honestly, this case is mind-boggling to me. There's so much information. There's so many different people involved in it, and I truly hope that they bring justice home for these women. So that is the case of Dr. No, the Ohio prostitute killer. I hope you guys liked today's video. Let me know if you like this style of video, if you prefer if I just tell you the story and don't, you know, put on makeup, however y'all would prefer it. Let me know if you have any tips on how I can get better. Definitely let me know, because y'all are my best critics. You know what I'm doing wrong, so just let me know. But other than that, I hope you guys will hit that subscribe button. I definitely plan on doing these more often. I love true crime. I've wanted to do this for a really long time on my channel. I just never, you know, thought I could do it, but I think I did okay. So let me know. Definitely check out Bailey Syrian. I will leave her channel link down below. I honestly binged all of her videos last night and I'm like obsessed. So she's fantastic. But yeah, I hope you guys will stick around, maybe watch some of my other videos, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.